Americans don't have the attention span that people around the world do for watching a sport that is free-flowing and continuous.
Out smash. Burleson's going to have a long throw. He makes it. That ends the inning. Bottom of the seventh, 5-3, Cincinnati.
In our sports, there are all these artificial stops and starts, which we use to indulge ourselves in beer and Cracker Jacks and whatever.
Football, baseball, basketball, hockey all have natural breaks. I think that people watching soccer for the first time are wondering what's going on. It's just up and down, up and down.
Our football is a game without stopping, a game where you've got to think for yourself, a game what you do with your feet and not with your hands. I mean, all these things are totally different for the American public.
If you really want to get soccer, you have to concentrate on it for the entire 45 minutes. I have sometimes likened it to a play. If you go to a play in the theater, you're going to pay attention to it until the intermission. Then you take a break and talk about it, and then you go sit back down again and watch the entire second act. Soccer's like that. It's not like the other American sports.
It's about tradition. And people in the rest of the world are passionate about soccer. There's no passion in America about soccer.
By the 1960s, there was no passion because there was no soccer.
It was just a country where 99.9% recurring of the population had never heard of it.
There were no youth leagues, no amateur teams, no nothing.
It was an absolute barren country in terms of soccer.
And yet the next great American football club would change the world's game forever.
1, 2, get down!
The phenomenon known as the New York Cosmos would not have happened without the passion of one man.
My father was a big sports fiend. He loved watching football. We went to basketball games all the time. We went to hockey games all the time. And I think the idea of developing a sport from basically scratch in the United States really turned him on.
He was a traveling salesman who became the world's first media titan. Long before Ted Turner and Rupert Murdoch, there was Steve Ross, creator of Warner Communications.
Paid the cost to be the boss.
They owned Warner Brothers Studio, which boasted some of the great film stars of the day, Redford, Streisand, Dustin Hoffman. They owned record companies that featured musicians like Dylan and the Rolling Stones, Ray Charles.
He started the first true entertainment empire with comic books and ended up igniting the cable television revolution. He also bought an arcade game company and helped create the first name in home computing.
He was a genius. In the financial world, he was really unbelievable. And he was also close to Frank Sinatra, by the way, you know, so it was unbelievable.
He was fantastic. He was not only a big businessman, he was very charming, and he was like a father to us.
He had transformed his father-in-law's funeral parlor and a collection of parking lots into a media empire. For Steve Ross, anything seemed possible, even soccer.
It captivated him. Man owned movie studios, man owned 6 record companies, cable, you know. Company doing $4, $5, $6 billion a year, and then he's enamored with going into a locker room.
But for what reason, what purpose was he obsessed with it?
What was that all about?
The Big Bang of the cosmos began with a backbeat. And two brothers from Istanbul, Ahmet and Neswi Erdogan, are responsible for more classic vinyl than Elvis and the Beatles put together. Ahmet founded Atlantic Records in 1947. Warner Communications bought Atlantic 20 years later, and the Erdigans went to work for Steve Ross.
Here we were, two New York businessmen who had this love of soccer. My brother decided to leave Atlantic Records. And Steve Ross said, if you stay, I'll do anything that you like. So my brother said to Steve Ross, said, listen, what I really would like is a professional soccer football team.
Neswi Erdogan came to me and Steve, actually, and said, you know, soccer is going to be the biggest sport. It is the biggest sport in the world, and clearly it's going to overtake America.
Television viewers in the U.S. had gotten their first taste of world football's potential in 1966. They saw almost 100,000 fans pack Wembley Stadium for the final between England and West Germany, as the BBC broadcast was carried live in America. In one of the most thrilling matches ever played, a young Franz Beckenbauer and his teammates could not stop England's Geoff Hurst.
It's a goal! Some people are on the pitch, they think it's all over. It is now. It's more.
In the UK alone, more than 32 million viewers tuned into the extra-time thriller. Still the biggest audience in BBC history.
You can't have a professional league without having investors convinced, and I think the showing of the World Cup in 1966 was the turning point. That convinced them that it could happen in this country.
The American game of the same name was flourishing, with the birth of the Super Bowl and the first network television contracts.
The American Football League franchises had become, over the years, sometimes quite quickly, worth millions and millions of dollars. And soccer, the franchises were very cheap. So you had the opportunity, the possibility of getting in on something on the ground floor.
Emboldened by the BBC's success in '66, American investors backed not one, but two professional American soccer leagues.
Trying to find an American who could play soccer, American-born who could play soccer, it just wasn't there.
By 1968, the two leagues had collapsed into one, the North American Soccer League, featuring 5 largely failing franchises.
We knew that if the league was going to be a success, if we're going to get the media and sponsorship and television attention, that we had to have a successful New York franchise.
The stars would align for the NASL just south of the border in Mexico City at the 1970 World Cup.
Neswi and I gave a big party at the World Cup. We invited Pelé and all of them came to our party.
I just happened to gate crash into a party, and a gentleman there introduced himself. He said, "Come on in. My name is Neswi Erdogan." So right then, that night, I met his brother as well, Ahmet, and we arranged to meet in New York later.
Neswi and Ahmet returned to Manhattan and held Steve Ross to his promise.
Steve and I called 8 other executives and got them to put in $35,000 each. I did it, Steve did it.
So, I mean, what's $1 million between friends?
They hired Clive Toye as general manager before most of them had ever seen a game.
Neswi said, I'm going to take you to St. Louis, the hotbed of soccer. I mean, this is where soccer is really big. We got there, and 340 people were in the stands. I counted them, 340 people. We watched the game, and it was, you know, I never knew what a header was. I thought giving great head was something else. And I looked at Steve. I said, we love Neswi, we love Ahmet, but this is going to be a disaster.
The league was nothing to talk about. I mean, it was really semi-professional, and we had a ragtag team.
They started recruiting players. All they needed was a name.
The previous New York professional club had been the Mets, New York Mets, and Mets is short for Metropolitan. So I thought, well, what's bigger than Metropolitan? And came up with Cosmopolitan, and suddenly it clicked, Cosmos. That's how the Cosmos became the Cosmos.
Toy's first hire was an English player-coach named Gordon Bradley.
Clive and I, he was in the office, and he was doing his planning and his planning. I was out in the fields, coaching.
My name is Gordon Bradley, and I'm a professional soccer player. A lot of you will probably not have heard of this game or seen this game played before, but I think it's just about the greatest game in the world.
In the early years, Bradley and Toy built the team with players mainly from New York's amateur leagues.
The league was called the North American Soccer League, a professional league. But in essence, it was a semi-pro league.
We didn't make a whole lot of money. We practiced twice a week. We all worked for a living. I worked for an architectural firm.
I was working as a teacher at a high school in an all-black neighborhood and then playing for the Cosmos on the side. I'll never forget the first contract I signed. You know, I was so proud. I thought I needed an agent. How do I negotiate? And then the coach at the time, Gordon Bradley, said, I'll offer you $2,100 for the season. I said, well, what would you say if I said no? He said, I couldn't care less. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll sign.
I worked at Warner Brothers Jungle Habitat, which was it was a safari up in West Milford, New Jersey.
Randy Horton was the Cosmos' first leading scorer. A chimp named Harold from his day job was the team's first mascot. Horton's boss at the Wild Animal Park, an architect from Havana, Cuba, named Rafael de la Sierra, became the Cosmos' first vice president.
I remember a friend of mine asking me if I knew how many people play on his side, and I have no idea. You know, it was 10 or 9 or, yeah, I don't know, but there were a bunch of guys, you know. I mean, it was really a disgrace of a team in many ways.
When we started with the Cosmos, it was a small ethnic crowd. Nobody knew who we were, and we just played because we loved the game. We loved the game of soccer.
They played their first game at Yankee Stadium, but soon moved 25 miles east of the city to Hofstra University on Long Island.
There were maybe 50 people in the stands, and it was mostly the family of the players. We were thinking of, you know, how can we possibly draw anything to see this game, you know?
We'd give away T-shirts, balls, keychains. And they would have me call radio stations of 2 listeners. And I felt like Jimmy Swaggart or Billy Graham at the time, you know, to spread the word.
Listen to me, legislator.
It was almost an impossible situation, you know? We tried everything, and it didn't really work.
In 1972, the Cosmos won the league championship. Not that anyone noticed. But by then, the ragtag team had hooked the only fan that mattered.
We're sitting out in the stands in the pouring rain with, 50 to 100 people watching the game. You know, my father's running down on the sidelines giving the players towels to wash off. You know, this is, that's who he was. He did anything he did like with a great deal of gusto.
It was all of the dreams that he had of owning a major league sports team and tried to believe that this was a major league sports team when indeed it wasn't. I went to Steve and I said, Steve, clearly this is something that Warner should take, not us, because this is going to lose quite a bit of money.
The 10 original investors sold their stake in the Cosmos to Warner Communications for $1. Ross put his empire behind the idea of American soccer.
When it first was released that Warner Communications was buying the soccer team, I don't think anybody really took it seriously.
Sports editors treated soccer as if it was a leper colony.
They wouldn't give us the time of day in the early days, so I used to buy them subscriptions to soccer magazines so you knew how to spell the word soccer.
The only magazine willing to publish a feature on the Cosmos barely mentioned the sport.
A friend of mine asked me whether I wanted to pose nude in a magazine. I said, dude, you're crazy. He said, no, they pay good money. They pay $5,000 and they're looking for an athlete, a professional athlete in New York. I thought it'd be semi-nude. I thought it'd be a towel or dim lighting or artistic picture. Needless to say, when the magazine hit the newsstand, there was nothing subtle about it. there I was, naked, frontal. It was wild. Man, I didn't think anybody would see it, but the Cosmos saw it. Clive went nuts. I mean, there was no morals clause in the contract, but he said it was disgraceful. I'm a professional athlete. We're trying to be role models. We're trying to sell the sport. We're trying to... I said, Clive, wait, you told me our biggest challenge is to get exposure. I got you more exposure in one centerfold than you've gotten all year.
In 1974, Ross moved the team closer to the city in an effort to attract more fans. The only available venue was Downey Stadium on Randall's Island, just below the Triborough Bridge, connecting the Bronx and Queens with Manhattan.
You know, it's Randall's Island, a prison, and some guy selling hot dogs. That's all. And the field was like broken bottles and dirt, but we thought that was a step up.
I remember having great difficulty getting out of my bed on game days. Really not wanting to go to Randall's Island.
It was not the type of place that you'd play on purpose.
It's Randall's Island where you played all your home games. You might not like the ground, but they like it 50% worse than what you do, or 100% worse. You can do it, but it's up to you.
Randall's Island was quite appropriate, actually, I think, for some of the players we had playing at the time.
The team's fourth season would be its worst yet. 14 losses in 20 games.
We were getting absolutely nowhere. Nowhere. It was hopeless.
Steve Ross would need more than just a game to transform the Cosmos into a major league attraction.
New York, we talk about Joe DiMaggio, and we talk about Babe Ruth, and we talk about Mickey Mantle, and we talk about Joe Namath. And we said, you know, what we really need in this team is a big name player. Clive said to me, well, why don't we talk to this guy, Pelé? I said, well, who's Pelé? I have no idea.
Pelé was Pelé. There was no better player and more spectacular and more famous player in the history of the game than Pelé.
As a boy growing up in the slums of Brazil, he saw his father weep after their country's loss in the 1950 World Cup final. Pelé vowed to win one for his father. 8 years later, at age 17, he became the youngest man ever to win a World Cup winner's medal, leading Brazil to victory. The first of a record 3 World Cup championships.
There was only one player in the world who could break through this crust here of, just antipathy more than just indifference, and that was Pelé.
In October 1974, he announced his retirement from his lifelong club, Santos.
Clive came to us one day and said, I think there's a chance of getting Pelé.
Well, that's not quite true. It was my brother who told Steve Ross that we should sign Pelé.
That is the biggest load of nonsense I've heard today. Maybe this week, maybe this year. The idea of signing Pelé was either Phil Woosnam's or mine.
The first approach to Pelé was done in 1970.
Long before anyone at Warner, including Ahmed and Neswi and Steve Ross and everybody else, had ever heard of soccer.
Steve Ross asked Neswi, who is the greatest player? And Neswi said, the greatest player is Pelé.
I gotta just tell you that, and I'm gonna stop for a minute by saying, you don't have to stop the camera, but this is going to be like Rashomon. Everybody's going to have a different view of everything. You understand that.
Toye and Woosnam had in fact approached Pelé about coming to America just 1 month after the Cosmos was formed. Toye even insisted the team's colors be yellow, the same as Brazil.
The name, the Cosmos, the city, New York, my face, my name, had been registered, you might say.
In 1971, Toye could only dream of signing a World Cup legend. By '74, he worked for a dream maker and a risk taker.
People around him would say, you know, you can't get there. And he'd say, I don't want to hear about can't. Who is it? Let's try.
When Steve Ross looked at Pelé, he didn't just see the world's greatest soccer player. He saw a global brand. He saw Pelé soccer shoes, Pelé jerseys, even Pelé cologne that Warner's could license to every soccer-playing country in the world. And he also saw something else. He saw television.
He saw a path to what had been promised. Soccer as America's new big league sport.
What's it going to cost? I mean, that's always the first question.
That's very much the American mentality. If we can't create it, we can assume it, because at the end of the day, it's all about money.
Nestle, myself, and Pelé, Raphael, and I guess Clive met in the seaside resort with a fellow by the name of Shisto, who was Pelé had 32 advisors.
We play soccer with Pelé on the beach. Can you imagine?
That'll be on my headstone. J. Emmett, he played soccer with Pelé.
And by then, Real Madrid and Juventus had started sniffing around. And so I had come up with, if you go to Real or Juventus, all you can win is another championship, whereas if you come with us, you can win a country.
He loved the lure of that. He was going to open a new frontier, and that was America, the great challenge of America.
I called that night, I called Steve Ross, and I said, you know what? I think this guy's gonna play for us. And he couldn't believe it. You know, he could not believe it.
I was negotiating the agreement with Dustin Hoffman for the film called All the President's Men. And then I got a call to see Steve and Jay in their office. And they said, Norman, we want you to go to Brazil and sign a soccer player by the name of Pelé. And I said, okay. I was greeted by a number of paparazzi and other photographers.
People idolized Pelé, as they did all over the world, I suspect. But in Brazil, he was clearly a national treasure, and they didn't want to let him go.
Ross was ready to risk $2 million for 3 years of play. Pelé wanted $5 million for 2 years.
Quite a difference.
There was no way we were going to spend that kind of money, so we called Jay.
They called me at about 2 in the morning, saying, you know, you've got to change the deal a little. I said, hey, listen, Norman, you know what to do. Do what you have to do. Like, we got to get him. We want him, you know, no matter pretty much what it costs.
And he said, I have one more thing to tell you. I said, what's that, Jay? And he hung up on us.
And then I took the phone off the hook, because I knew there'd be 6 other calls.
All right, so basically it was up to us.
And we proposed a 5-part deal, 5 contracts.
3 years for playing, 10 years of worldwide marketing rights, a 14-year PR contract, a music contract. The total package was, we owned him lock, stock, and barrel.
Does anybody ever mention the amount of money we paid Pelé?
Not a lot of money.
Pelé was paid $4.5 million.
$3 million for 2 years.
$5 million.
Altogether, $2.7 million.
The highest paid player in baseball became the home run king that year. Henry Hank Aaron was making $200,000 a season.
What Warner's came to him with was like the apple in the Garden of Eden. It would have been a very, very strong and strange individual who would turn that down.
Pelé okayed the deal. His country did not. Citing his status as a national treasure, the president of Brazil demanded he play 1 more year for his country rather than go to America. Pele turned to his suitors for help. Warner Communications headquarters, 75 Rockefeller Center, New York.
Nelson Rockefeller was the vice president of the United States.
My father worked for Nelson Rockefeller, and they asked my dad if he would ask him maybe put in a good word to the Brazilian government, and wouldn't this be a great thing for both countries to have Pele come here.
Like 3 or 4 days later, Nelson called back and says he has no idea who Pele is. He couldn't care less if he comes and play here or not, but that there is a guy in the cabinet, and he thought that would be a fantastic idea, and his name is Henry Kissinger.
In my dealings with both the Brazilian government, I tried to convince them that having Pele play in the United States was a tremendous asset for Brazil.
Pele got a phone call from the Secretary of State of Brazil, begging him to please sign the contract with the Cosmos for the good of the relationship of Brazil and the United States. Well, when Pele received that call, he said, my God, you guys can do anything, you know, I'm going with you, no matter what.
Steve Ross announced the signing at the legendary 21 Club in Manhattan.
The Cosmos held their press conference there in a room aptly named the Hunt Room, as if Pele was the prize catch.
Hello. The press corps got there 3-4 hours before the press conference and nailed their cameras, TV cameras, into the floor. And these were all the people who would never cover the Cosmos, who would never show up or respond to anything. And the sign said capacity 143 people.
There must have been 300 reporters from all over the world.
Cameras right in front, please move back.
And Pele, was on Pele time, which means that he was 2 hours late.
Steve and Jay were waiting for us. Where the hell is he? Where the hell is he? He's coming, he's coming.
And on my immediate left, Stephen J. Ross, Chairman of the Board and President of Warner Communications. And now at the door, the legend, the great one, the King, Pele.
When Pele finally came out, the rush of people to come up and meet him was, unbelievable. I had never seen such a thing.
Will you please behave yourself?
So all the reporters turned into fans. We finally calmed the press corps down. One person was heckling us from the back, and we were looking behind the lights, and there's Dick Young up on a platform talking about the denigration of professional baseball, how soccer would ruin the sport of baseball. He was just heckling the entire time. Soccer's for foreigners, shouldn't be played in America, everything negative.
Dick Young was a crusty conservative man who believed that if you didn't love everything about America, you should get the hell out. Young was probably the best read sports writer in the United States and held a considerable amount of power. To him, the only story was that Warner's was shelling out this, obscene amount of cash for somebody he never heard of.
O soccer pegou nos Estados Unidos. Pode espalhar por aí.
You can spread out the news to all the world that the soccer arrived finally in USA.
Within 10 seconds, the time it took Pele to sign his contracts, it all changed.
Finally this evening, something about an extraordinary man from Brazil who's been soccer superstar Pele.
Today in New York City, Pele,
the greatest soccer player who ever lived.
Everywhere in the world, people knew that there was a Cosmos soccer team in New York and that Pele played on it.
Fly, fly, touch the sky. What you gonna do now? There's no one.
We're down at practice at Randall's Island, trying to avoid the broken glass on the field and cuts on our legs. And then all of a sudden, we see a guy coming on the field and he's spray painting the dirt.
We had to take spray paint and paint the mud because there was so little grass.
we're going, this dude is nuts. I don't know what he's doing. And then we see a helicopter flying over.
The image was irresistible, that this was the beginning of a Greek piece of theater, if you like. That Pelé was stepping in here to save this league from being trite and ordinary, that he was going to move it into the realm of a big-time league.
The Cosmos were already 9 games into the 75 season and last in their division with just 3 wins. Nevertheless, CBS agreed to broadcast Pelé's American debut.
Pelé is the most famous player in the history of soccer, and today, at the age of 34, he began a new career, playing for the New York Cosmos in the North American Soccer League.
The first game that Pelé played here on a Sunday afternoon against Dallas, the place was filled, absolutely filled.
What brings you out today, sir? Curiosity. The guy's worth $4 million. I gotta see him. I've never seen a soccer game in my life.
We could have gotten in 2 or 3 times as many. It was a huge, huge game.
Pelé's magic drew the largest crowd in the history of the Cosmos.
Mr. Ross calling up, how many have we sold? How many have we sold?
I came to see Pelé because I compare him as a Muhammad Ali in soccer game. 1 minute the place dead, the next minute the whole place is alive.
He doesn't know what the field is like. It could be anything. It could be up and down, in and out, all around. But he played in it. He could have said, I'm not playing on that field. He didn't. He played 90 minutes. Enough said.
And when the cameras pointed to the field, it was green, it was beautiful.
The world's greatest player did not disappoint, rescuing his new team in dramatic fashion.
With the Cosmos trailing by 2, his perfect pass made a goal for Mordecai Spiegel. And then he soared above the Dallas defenders to head home, powerfully, unstoppably, the equalizing goal.
When the game was over, Pelé was in the shower. The locker room was packed with reporters. He gestured me from the shower. He goes, psst, psst, psst. So I go to him, and he says, Rafael, this is the first and the last game I play here. How can you say this to me? I mean, you know, don't you see it's a big success? How can you possibly say that to me? He says, you know, the most important thing in my life is my feet. And look at my feet. I have a fungus that I have contacted here. I'm not playing with you anymore. I said, Pelé, this is green paint. That we painted the field green. He could not believe it.
His first season would be the Cosmos' last on Randall's Island.
I had to get Pelé in the stadium, which he could play in, he should play in, the stadium, Giant Stadium.
Less than 7 miles from Times Square, construction in East Rutherford, New Jersey had been underway since 1972. Giant Stadium, with more than 75,000 seats, was scheduled to open for American football in the fall of 1975. Ross was banking that by then, America would be ready for professional soccer. But in the summer of '75, Pelé could hardly save his team, much less his sport.
He thought we were passing him the ball too often. And I think that was, you know, limitation on our part, thinking that as long as we got the ball to Pelé, he would take care of the rest of it.
It was hard to not be in awe every day. And you would think you do something every day, you get very used to it. But every day, there's Pelé on a field. I mean, come on, it's Pelé. I'm learning so much just by being around the guy, you know, and how he plays.
The biggest challenge for us on the field was not stopping and watching him play, because he still had these incredible moves.
Every place we went, and we're straggling along, you know, there's Pelé, you know, we're just like, and we're with him. You know?
I don't think any one of us ever felt entitled. We were honored. We knew we were experiencing something that I always said that there could have been 100 goalkeepers as good as me, and I'm sure Smitty said.
I had a hard time as well thinking I belonged there.
He was a superstar in a strange land, but he knew his role.
I come to play in America because I believe in soccer in America. The kids here love the sport. The American people sport naturally. I come to play here because I know in a few years we'll have a good team in America.
think his challenge was really figuring out how best to fit in to a team of journeymen that, were trying their best.
He talked to me a couple of times, try to play like you're playing a game of chess, be 2 moves ahead of the ball or something, of the play.
He would finish the season with 5 goals and 4 assists, leading his new team to 7 wins in 9 games. And although the Cosmos missed the playoffs, Pelé had done his job.
We look at things in the world of the Cosmos as before Pelé and after Pelé.
His mere presence shattered attendance records in Boston, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C.
When I would go visit my grandmother in Washington, you're hoping that when you were there that the Dips were playing the Cosmos, that you could see Pelé.
After he pulled a hamstring late in the season, more than 20,000 fans in Philadelphia came out just to see him in street clothes.
Now that the world's most famous athlete was in New York City, the media could no longer ignore the sport.
Pelé went to the White House, where President Ford found a soccer ball a lot more elusive than a football.
Maybe I could do it better with my hand than my foot.
And while most of the press was positive, there remained one powerful skeptic.
Dick Young said, you know what, I want to meet Pelé, and I want to meet him one-on-one, and let's go to a baseball game in my environment.
They attended a Mets game late in the season at Shea Stadium.
We are not announced. No one knows we're at the game. End of the first inning, we start getting a cluster of people around us. By the third inning, we were absolutely besieged by people. We couldn't control the fans. The umpire had to call play, and we're escorted onto the field because the security couldn't control the stadium anymore. It was absolute pandemonium. Dick Young, he's almost crying, weeping openly. His heart is breaking that his baseball fans recognized Pelé, who he had come to take down. And if he was really a reporter, he had only one recourse, and that is write the truth. This game was truly a spectator sport and truly global.
By the bicentennial year of 1976, foreign football was encroaching even further on the American pastime. The Cosmos moved into Yankee Stadium. Pelé, playing just half the season in '75, had tripled their average attendance.
Pelé brought instant credibility to the NASL. Because of him, other stars came over here, from Gordon Banks to Rodney Marsh to Jeff Hurst. Even George Best touched down in Los Angeles, because every other franchise thought, well, if the Cosmos can do it, we can.
When I went to Tampa, one of the questions the American journalists asked me was, you've been described as the White Pelé. And I said, that's not quite true. Pelé is the Black Rodney Marsh. And that didn't seem to go down too well.
For Steve Ross, the world's greatest player was not enough.
New York likes winners. You could have God himself as a striker for the Cosmos, and if you lost, nobody cares.
I've scored, I think, in 220 league games, 253 goals, so that's who I was. So I was the man to put the ball in the back of the net.
Giorgio Canaglia was the leading scorer of the Italian club Lazio in 1975.
I was the highest paid player in Italy, and therefore I was a bit unhealthy.
When I first met him in Rome, I was in his car, and he had a gun in the glove compartment. Oh, you know, I said, what the hell am I doing here?
He thrust himself upon us. His time in Italy was running out. He was been thrown off the national team. I mean, it was the easiest signing of a named player that anyone could ever have.
My first wife was American, like my second wife is American. Therefore, I said, let's go to America.
Talks a lot, and half of it's not worth listening to. The other half I wouldn't listen to either, so where you got him?
Giorgio Canaglia is Italian, speaks English with a Welsh accent, scored a lot of goals, and those are about the only positive things I can think to say about him.
Very disagreeable fellow at times. He was a backstabbing individual.
They probably can't stand me. I don't give a shit. Why don't these people just judge me for what I did on the field? That would be a nice thing, wouldn't it?
Steve Ross brought in 5 new players that year, 3 from overseas, none more prolific than Giorgio Canaglia.
Yeah, I was demanding on the field, yeah. But at the end of the day, there is nobody that's scored more goals in the history of North American soccer than myself.
Giorgio was extremely passionate about soccer, and I think he found a like-minded individual in my father.
Pele was his prize catch, but Giorgio became his confidant.
Let me tell you, Giorgio and Steve Ross had a very strange relationship. I don't know what it was, but he did have, Steve Ross, he had his ear.
That's absolutely the truth. I mean, Giorgio had won a soft spot in the heart of Steve Ross.
I remember Ross wearing a pair of Cosmo sweatpants with the number 9 on it, Canaglia's number. He was wearing Canaglia's pants. That was sort of a metaphor for their relationship.
Giorgio was the opposite of a Pele. Giorgio wore his emotions on his sleeve, dynamic, big, good-looking, long hair, an idol like a movie star in Italy.
When you walk down the street with Giorgio, it was like walking down the street in the heyday of Joe DiMaggio or Mickey Mantle.
Pele reached the whole world and got New York's attention. Giorgio put it over the top because people wanted to come to boo him or cheer him or yell at him or throw things at him. And that's the kind of passion you expect in New York.
He scored 19 goals in 19 games, while Pele led the league in assists. Together, they took the Cosmos, kicking and screaming, into the playoffs.
Giorgio was a little jealous of Pele. He wanted to be Pele.
I just wanted to score goals. I didn't care who played beside me, really. I never did. That's why sometimes I wasn't liked. But I don't care about that either.
He's the only professional player I've ever heard in my life who would make criticisms of Pele.
Off the field, he was all right. He's, you know, a very quiet person, a lovable person. On the field, I had some problems with him, yeah.
There was a memorable episode in the Cosmos locker room when Canaglia said that he was disgusted that Pele wasn't giving him the service that he needed to score goals. Pele, you can imagine, is not used to teammates criticizing him, fired right back and said, "You shoot from no fucking angle." And Canaglia jumped off his stool and shouted, "I am Canaglia. If I shoot from some place, it's because Canaglia can score from that place." And Pele was near tears, shook his head and walked out of the locker room.
I didn't want him to do bad. I wanted him to do well. But he kept coming inside next to me, and I said, you know, listen, one guy's going to mark the two of us. So try to stay wide because you'll be more effective and you'll score goals.
All great goal scorers have an ego. Give me the ball. Why are you giving it to Pele? Give it a name. He wants the ball. He wants to score.
Listen, my friend, if you don't have egos in life, especially in the sports, you're not going to go very far.
The two huge personalities did have one thing in common.
Giorgio had his locker room with his blue velvet robe and his Chivas Regal, pack of cigarettes, sunglasses. He had it all.
The women went wild. They just went wild.
I remember one night, there was Pele with a blonde on each arm. He looked at me and he smiled and said, "Not for the book, my friend."
He'd sit in the lobby in every town, often by himself, doing the old winky winky, like he was on the cruise.
Their shared passion for life may have cost them a shot at the championship. In the second round of the 1976 playoffs, the heavily favored Cosmos faced the Tampa Bay Rowdies and Rodney Marsh.
We knew them and we knew about the Cosmos team and we knew the personnel. So we had a limo that met them off the plane with 2 girls in the limo and 2 bottles of Chivas Regal. And 24 hours later, at the game, they both came out onto the pitch looking very much the worse for wear.
Tampa Bay won the match 3-1.
Steve Ross was not happy.
He didn't like to lose games, or no, he didn't like to lose in anything. You know, he didn't like to lose in board games. You know, so yeah, a soccer game, no, he hated to lose a soccer game. In championship games, you didn't want to lose one of those.
Immediately following the loss in '76, Ross took his team where it could be truly appreciated.
We went on tour, playing all over Europe, France, and in Belgium, and Switzerland, and in Italy.
They went on 2 exhibition tours in the span of 7 months.
We became like the ambassadors of goodwill.
Steve Ross wanted them to be treated like great stars.
We travel first class, 5-star hotels, unlimited budgets, no such thing as per diem.
They weren't spending that money, they were spending shareholders' money.
The publicity that we generated for Warner was enormous. Publicity that they couldn't buy.
One little stockholder said to us, Mr. Ross, at the annual meeting, what does this cost? Do you lose money? He says, well, we lose some money. Well, how much do you lose? And he looked at her straight in the eye and said, 2 cents a share. And the whole audience applauded. What a wonderful venture this is. Not recognizing that 2 cents a share was $5 million.
In 10 years, American soccer had developed into a different game than world football. The league had tailored the rules for American fans.
There had to be a winner. If it ended 2-2, you went into a mini-game after that. And if it stayed at 2-2 or even became 3-3, you had to go to what was called the North American Soccer League shootout, going one-on-one with the goalkeeper from 35 yards out, dribbling in and having 5 seconds to get your shot off. And I loved it.
I thought it was fantastic.
It makes the game more emotional.
I still think in Europe they should try it.
In the spring of '77, Steve Ross was at last able to move the Cosmos across the Hudson River to Giant Stadium for Pelé's final season. While the league had Americanized the game, Steve Ross wanted to take it a step further.
He asked me to prepare a plan, which included the Cosmos cheerleaders, the halftime show, Bugs Bunny, who I was able to get from Jungle Habitat, Americanizing the game.
Americans like putting their kind of own twist and flavor to things, and I think that that's what they were trying to do, to basically have more of the American fans kind of come in and embrace it.
At the same time, he continued internationalizing his team, surrounding Pelé and Canalla with 14 new players from 7 different countries.
We were the first team that had a totally international squad.
It was like Noah's Ark, okay? There was something to please everybody.
Nevertheless, they lost 3 of their first 5 games, averaging little more than 20,000 fans in their new giant home.
Here we're putting up, a lot of money on the field, and we were not drawing. So he wanted to make a change, raise the bar.
They sent me to Germany. They sent me to sign Franz Beckenbauer.
Turned back by Geoff Hurst in England in the classic World Cup final of 1966, the Kaiser would lead his country to glory 8 years later.
talk about someone who was the ultimate team leader, the one that organized in the back and was just so calm and collective on the ball. You never got the sense that he was in any sort of state of panic, regardless of whether he was up by 4 goals or down by 4 goals.
Twice voted European Player of the Year, Franz Beckenbauer was lured to America at the height of his career.
I knew Pelé was there, Giorgio Chinaglia was there, but the rest I didn't know. So it was an adventure.
Giorgio was berserk. Why do we need to hire Beckenbauer? Why do we need Beckenbauer here? We don't need him at all. Now, he was the third banana.
Beckenbauer's first game was a 4-2 loss to arch-rival Tampa Bay. The following week, they beat Toronto at home in front of 31,000 fans. Steve Ross wanted more.
Steve was what you would call a star fucker.
Every time, you know, somebody was in New York shooting a film or doing an album or whatever, they got dragged to a Cosmos game.
You know, Warner Communication. You own a movie company, you own 6 record companies, cable. I think you can get celebrities. I think that's pretty easy.
Actors, actresses, politicians, you name it, we had them all at the stadium.
I mean, I don't know who they were. I mean, the bloody locker room was littered with people. It was becoming a joke.
Henry Kissinger never missed a game.
I have a passion for what we call soccer.
I remember once Gordon Bradley looked over in the corner and saw this guy with longish hair, skinny as a rail, looked like he was on drugs. He told our security guy, get that guy out of here.
Who is this guy? Everybody came to him and said, Mick Jagger. He didn't recognize him because he looked so terrible.
Jagger and Kissinger were welcomed on a weekly basis, while the first 2 men on the Cosmos team were quietly shown the door.
I came May '77. After 3 weeks, Clive Toy, the president, he resigned. Gordon Bradley, the coach, he was fired. I said to myself, oh my God, where am I?
Just weeks before he was fired, Bradley had dropped Chinaglia from the first team.
They didn't like me. I'm sure they didn't like me. So there's only one way that we can get rid of this guy, probably drop him. But they have little minds. They thought then I would ask for a transfer or something. Forgetting that some people push the buttons.
On Giorgio's recommendation, Ross hired coach Eddie Firmani away from Tampa Bay.
He brought in his guy, Eddie Firmani, to coach the team, knowing that Eddie would do his bidding.
Just put the balls in front of Giorgio, because Giorgio, when he goes, he wants the ball in front of him, not behind him. You know?
And he flowered under Eddie, and he scored a bushel full of goals.
You knock all those beautiful balls just in front of him, put all the balls in there, so they go straight in goal. That's right. Oh, yeah.
It is unquestionable that Giorgio Chinaglia had a malign influence over Steve Ross and therefore over the Cosmos. No question about that. I say malign advisedly. I could think of stronger words, but there may be women and children watching this.
You see, what they don't understand, people don't understand, if you do your job good, I'm going to give you a lot of credit. I have my credit on the field. What the hell do I need anything else? My goal just was to have the best team in the world, and it was good for the company. That was my goal. Nothing else.
The lunatics took over the asylum.
He was always pleasant to me, you know, he's a suck-up guy. Pele, when he scored a goal, never looked at us. Bobby Smith, when he scored a goal, never looked at us. But every time that Giorgio scored a goal, he would run back in front of Steve and bow down and suck up to Steve.
By the last week of June 1977, Chinaglia had 8 goals and the team had 10 wins. They avenged 2 straight losses to the Rowdies in front of more than 62,000 fans.
Pelé scored a hat-trick. When I look at games that I played in America, that would definitely be top of the heap.
Then they dropped 5 of their next 7 games.
Steve Ross said, now we have Pelé, we have Beckenbauer, we have Chinaglia. But the rest, you need more.
So I went back to Sao Paulo.
In my opinion, the most important signing from a team point of view was Carlos Alberto.
As captain of the Brazilian national team, he had helped Pelé win his third World Cup title in 1970. With only 4 games remaining in the '77 season, Carlos Alberto came to America to help his old teammate win one last championship.
It's unforgettable. The day I arrived in New York, it was the day of the blackout.
At 9:34 last night, it all went black.
Dark streets was a wild outburst of crime.
A night of no lights, elevators, subway trains, airports, air conditioning, traffic signals, television.
Arson, looting, mugging, and 1,000 false fire alarms.
In the darkness, July 13th, it seemed as if the world was turning upside down.
We had the criminal Son of Sam, who was a serial murderer. Riots in a blackout. Major problem was the bankruptcy of the city of New York. It was really quite a year.
When the power returned, the lights came up on Soccer in America.
Soccer, and it's fast becoming as popular here as it's been in the rest of the world.
It was like an explosion.
I mean, it was a whirlwind. It was like a meteor taking off. One day we were nobody, and the next day we're playing at Giant Stadium, and limo's picking us up to take us right to Studio 54 after the game.
We had a table there, you know, a big table. It was reserved for the Cosmos, not only for the players, also for, you know, for the bosses.
The doorman looked me up and down and gave me a hard time until I uttered the 4 magic words, "I'm with the Cosmos."
I remember